Why Johnny hates jazz? Your father was a jazz musician. What was the reason?
Well, Johnny was never in the band. Johnny is actually the brother-in-law of my colleague, my bandmate, Mike Nacito.
Juancito. Mhm.
And Johnny was at a family gathering, and on the record player, on the vinyl record player, someone was playing Take Five by Dave Brubeck. And Johnny walked over to the record player, ripped the vinyl from the record player, and broke it in two over his knee. And someone shouted, Johnny, oh, Johnny hates jazz. Excuse me. Um, in the family gathering. And Mike remembered that name for some reason. So, excuse me. So one of the weird things about being called Johnny Hates Jazz exactly is that my father was a very successful jazz musician.
Mhm.
And when he heard the name, he wouldn't speak to me for a month.
Understand totally.
Yeah, but he actually was my greatest supporter as well, and he
Mhm.
saw the humor in it as well.
Mhm. All right. Kim Wilde sang backing vocals on Turn Back the Clock. Am I right?
Yes, you did. Um, so Kim was signed to a record label called Rack Records,
Mhm.
RAK. And at that time, the three of us in the band, there were three originally, myself, Mike, and Calvin. Calvin sadly passed away
Yeah, a
recently.
few days ago. Mhm.
Yeah. But we all met at Rack Studios for different reasons. We'd all been there for about 4 years, and then we formed Johnny Hates Jazz. So we knew Kim because she was always there recording. Um, and when we asked her if she would do backing vocals, she was immediate. There was no question. Of course she would. She was a friend
Mhm.
of ours.
Mhm.
And she's got one of those voices, I think, amazing voices, where no one sounds like her.
Mhm.
She's got a complete, you hear Kim and you just go, it's Kim Wilde
Mhm.
in whatever context. And I think even in Turn Back the Clock, where she's doing backing vocals and they're quite soft, you know it's her. So many years later, what, 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we did a gig in London at one of the venues at the O2 in London. And Kim came on stage and sang Turn Back the Clock with us for the first time
Wow.
in nearly 40 years. And then she stayed on and sung Shattered Dreams with us, and we did all kinds of things. But it
Wow.
was really special, very emotional, very emotional.
All right. 4 million copies of Turn Back the Clock was sold. So it was a huge success. Tell me, what was really happening inside Johnny Hate Jazz at the moment? Were you enjoying the success, or what already becoming difficult for you?
We were enjoying it, all three of us, in our different ways, because we were very different people, but we got on very well. But I think what was difficult for the band was that we managed ourselves. We had no manager.
Hmm.
And to this day, we have no manager.
Hmm.
So we're very, we Mike and Calvin produced the records. I wrote them. We played all the instruments ourselves. We were very self-contained, and we'd been in the music business quite some years. So we just wanted to do it ourselves. And we'd never met someone who we thought could represent us well. But what that meant was that part of you becomes the successful musician, and part of you becomes the businessman dealing with the record industry, which is a difficult industry. And so we all became two different people. And that created more conflict, I think, than would have happened if we had a manager we all trusted. And so on one hand, we were enjoying it, and it was wonderful
Hmm.
that people, as you know, Andre, all around the world, people embraced Johnny Hates Jazz. It was incredible.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it was getting more and more difficult because of this insistence that we manage ourselves. And it got to the point where, um, as you may or may not know, I left in '88. We had a number 2 hit in the US at that time.
Mhm.
And I couldn't handle the interpersonal pressures that had been created because of that situation. So I left.
Yes, that's my next question. You were on the top, and your decision was, okay, I left the band. So it must have been a very difficult decision for you. Um, so in a very short answer, what was the reason, the main reason that you said, okay, that I that's enough, and I'm just want to leave?
I think that let me say this. You want a short reason? Well, the reason I gave you actually is the best reason. We managed ourselves. We did all of the business as well as all of the creativity, and it just got too much. And it meant that there were interpersonal differences within the band that I found very difficult. Um, but I think we also have to remember in the 1980s, there were a lot of bands that imploded. Sometimes it took longer, sometimes it was shorter.
Hmm.
But it was for a young British musician, it was an amazing time. 60s, 70s, 80s. It was our second biggest export. The country's second biggest export was music.
Wow.
So the pressures on us were incredible, incredible. It wasn't just, record a few nice songs, put them up on Spotify and fingers do a few gigs. It was pretty radical. So I think the combination of events was for me too much, and I decided to walk away.
Mhm. And have you ever dreamed about to be popular when you were younger?
Oh, very much so.
Hmm.
I often say this, and I'm sure it's true from where you are, Andre. When we were younger, the only thing that existed in the world was music. We all wanted to be in music. I think kids today want to be footballers more than they want to be in music, or they want to be involved in AI, or they want to be involved in computer games. My daughter's a computer game designer, so I know.
Wow.
Um, but for us, our music was a separate universe. And it was all, we grew up, I know it's going to sound obvious. We grew up listening, of course, to the Beatles and the Kinks and the Moody Blues and the Stones and Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and 10cc and Genesis, and it just goes on. And so it was everything. And what we wanted was, it wasn't financial. I know that sounds perhaps not believable. The money would come, fine,
Mhm.
but we wanted to be appreciated. We wanted people to connect with our music, because music is about communication. It's just a different way of speaking to people. And so when people connected with it, it was the best feeling.
Wow. Did you ever regret leaving Johnny Hates Jazz?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ah.
Absolutely. You know, I understood why I did, and I went to have a very interesting life, and I became a dad, 2 kids. I was very, very proud of them. Lived in the US for many years. I was based at Peter Gabriel's studio in Britain for many years. I got
Mm.
involved in all kinds of things. But there was always a feeling that if circumstances had been different, I would have stayed. It was as much my band as it was Mike's and Calvin's, and I was the songwriter as well. So all the thought process of what we were going to say came through me.
Mhm.
So I knew there was a sense of something was unfinished.
Mhm.
So in a way, part of me knew that we would find each other again one day.
Wow. You were very young when Shattered Dreams and Turn Back the Clock became a global hit. Do you remember the moment when you realized that, oh, these songs just changed my life?
As a writer, it's hard to know. You can't. It's like seeing yourself. You can you can look in a mirror, but you can't. You don't really know how people see you. So when I was writing Shattered Dreams, and I'd been a songwriter for many, many years, um, professional songwriter, and my dad came in and said, "What is that you're writing?" I actually wrote that song, by the way, in the room I'm in now,
Oh,
and the piano I wrote it on is just over there. Um,
so
and he said, "What's that you're
you still
writing?"
live on the same place?
Well, I've returned because my mom,
Ah.
it still lives in the house we grew up, and she's 99 now.
Woo! Okay.
So I'm looking after her in the last moments of her life,
Hmm.
which is a real honor. But I set up my studio in the same room where, as a teenager, I used to write those songs. So I wrote Shattered Dreams here, Hero, Turn Back the Clock, Don't Say Stuff. Everything was written here. So Dad came in and he said, "What's that you're writing?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking of calling it Shattered Dreams." And he went quiet and he said, "I think you've written your first hit." And that gave me confidence. And then Mike and Calvin heard it and they said, "Yeah, we think you've written your first hit."
Hmm.
And so that was really helpful.
Shattered Dreams is very emotional, uh, almost melancholic. The feeling of of that songs. That just tell me the background of the song.
I've often been asked this, was it about anything? And I think Shattered Dreams is a subconscious song. Whereas I Don't Want to Be a Hero, I knew exactly what I was writing. Shattered Dreams was more about disappointment and struggle. And I think that part of it came from the fact that I had been in the music industry many years. I'd written for other people, I'd written for myself, had singles released. And you know what? It was a tough world to be a part of for a young guy. It was pretty brutal. You know, are you familiar with Simon Cowell?
Hmm.
So Simon Cowell over here is, on X Factor and in the States as well. And, he comes across as a bit of an asshole. That's the fact of it. The fact is that the music industry was full of those people back then. And it wasn't that it was wrong, but it wasn't it because they were trying to keep the quality high, those people. But it was difficult for a young guy with not so much confidence. So I think Shattered Dreams actually was about my experience in the music industry as much as anything.
Oh, okay, because it sounds for me sometimes like a sad song. It's not, that sounds to me that it's melancholic and it's not very positive, that's my Shattered Dreams. So uh,
It's amazing when we perform that live and everyone is singing Shattered Dreams at the top of their voices. They're not feeling sad at all, but it is. You're right. It's a very melancholy song. In fact, I think most of my songs are melancholy,
mhm.
but the energy is not. The energy is. It's got something. It's got some energy. So that is what speaks to people, I think.
I remember exactly when I heard Shattered Dreams for the first time. I'm listening to radio, and that was a chart. Uh, that was a gold chart that they call it that time. That was in the, I don't know, 90, 94, 95. And I heard, wow, what is that song? Was a brilliant song. So, and I remember exactly when I heard it for the first time. So, and I fell in love at that time. I said, whoa, I was 12 years old, maybe because I have a older brother. So he just came home with tapes and we listened to rock set and Duran Duran and so a lot of new wave music. So I'm a huge fan of new wave, like Visage and Ultravox and our
Oh,
Human League. And uh, I know I met Steve Strange, so I did his show in Bratislava. So his surname was really fits to him. So uh,
it's interesting. I've got to tell you, Andre, this is quite interesting. Another guy in Visage was a guy called Rusty Egan.
Rusty again, yes, Blitzkid,
Yeah.
or I
Yeah.
never met him. And
So Rusty kind of discovered me when I was 17 or 18. And I was a protege of Rusty. He produced me, and we did a lot of recordings together. He introduced me to electronic music because I was really into soul and funk.
Mm-hmm.
And it was he who said, "You need to start learning how to use a drum machine."
Mm-hmm.
And I was already a keyboard player. And it was because of the recordings that I did with Rusty that I eventually got signed to Rack Records
Mm-hmm.
and eventually formed Johny Hates Jazz. So Visage is a part of my history too. What a great records as well. Great
Mm-hmm.
records.
Yeah. Um, okay. When somebody come up to you today and say Shattered Dreams or Turn Back the Clock as an album was soundtrack of my youth or soundtrack of my life, what does mean to you nowadays after
It
these
is,
years?
oh, it's incredibly moving. There's no greater reward than that. And and a lot of people do say that, at our gigs. And of course, other artists have that with, maybe their most famous albums. Martin Fry, ABC with, Lexicon of Love, of course. You can name these albums: Duran Duran, Rio, Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair, or, Talk Talk, Color of Spring. It kind of goes
Mhm.
on and on
There's a
and
lot
on.
of mhm.
But, but I think what really moves me is when people come up to me after a gig and they'll talk about a specific song. And the song that people talk the most about and with the most emotion is I Don't Want to Be a Hero,
Mhm.
because that's an anti-war song. And so I always do a little speech before we perform that song, really honoring all the people who serve in our armed forces, because we have a huge amount of respect for them. The song is about the people who send them into conflicts, sometimes for the right reasons and sometimes for maybe the wrong reasons. And I get service personnel, people in the Army, Air Force, Navy, come up to me afterwards, or people who used to be in the armed forces, in tears, because finally someone's seen them and someone sung a song for them. And that brings everything into focus. That is the importance of music. Again, it's that communication. Andre, very quickly, I know I'm talking a lot here, but I
It's
think
okay.
music reaches into us and touches a part of us that nothing else can. And it allows us to feel that. Music's unique in that. And I've appreciated that power of music more as I'm older than I did when I was younger. So it's something we have to approach with care, because you want to touch the right things in people.
All right. When you listen Turn Back the Clock album today, is there a song on the album that brings us strong memories, good or
Hmm.
bad?
Well, well, in a way, there are perhaps more recently different seasons is the one, because although I wrote most of the songs on my own, I wrote different seasons with Calvin, who died a few days ago, as we were
Mhm.
saying. Calvin had not been in the band for 16 years, so we were not close anymore. But we went through a very important time in our lives together when we were younger. So there is a sadness to different seasons now. Um, but in general, it's really hard. I'm very close to all of those songs. You know, all I can say is that my favorite recording. So my favorite song is "I Don't Want to Be a Hero." My
Mhm.
favorite recording, slightly different, is "Don't Say It's Love."
Mhm.
"Don't Say It's Love." We just nailed it. We got it so right, in my opinion, with that.
My personal favorites.
Oh, great,
Sounds
man!
great.
Our
Really.
guitarist's personal favorite. All the guitarists who've ever played with us like that one the most, but Nick, who has been our guitarist for many years, loves that. Um, it should have been. It was originally it was going to be the second single in the US, but then I left, so unfortunately we never got that chance. Um, but Don't Say It's Love, I think, has a lot of positive things about it. Had a great video as well by Dominic
Mhm.
Senner. So yeah, that's the one.
Okay. After 25 years, you released album with Johnny Hates Jazz again. So that was a huge break, a long time break. So what did you discover about yourself and about the band during the years away?
I discovered everything about myself because the 1990s was a time when I really grew up. I became a dad. I I lived up the road from Real World Studios, Peter Gabriel Studios, for many years, so I was based there. And then I moved to the US and I had a solar powered studio in Arizona and I recorded a environmentally focused album called Tomorrow. And I was constantly changing. I was interacting with Native American people quite a bit. And so so when it came time to decide was I going to rejoin Johnny Hates Jazz, I think I think what had happened was this. In the 90s, music of the 80s was looked down on by the new wave of music. So the 90s crowd wanted to put down the 80s and the journalists wanted to talk negatively about it. And they wanted it to all about the 90s. That's what it was going to be. Oasis, it's going to be Blur, it's going to be Take That, it was going to be the Spice Girls, all this stuff.
Mhm.
And I kind of think that probably happens every decade anyway, but they really got good at it in the 90s. And so I kind of hid from that part of me that was Johnny Hates Jazz. And I know the other guys did as well. It was like no one rewarded you for it. No one really honored you for it. So, so I rediscovered my connection with the band when I wrote a song on this album I mentioned called Tomorrow, and the song is called Nothing Left to Lose. And I decided I'm going to just connect with that part of me again.
Mhm.
It was probably the best song on the album. And from that, I thought, well, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to repossess that part of me. So I wrote a song called Magnetized.
Mhm.
And at that same time, Mike and Calvin reached out to me. Calvin was still in the band at that time and said, look, should we talk? So I went to meet Mike actually in Cambridge where he lives for a bowl of pasta.
Mhm.
We hadn't seen each other for over 20 years. We hadn't spoken.
Oh,
And I sat down opposite him and it was like, hey man, how you doing? And it was like two brothers. You know,
you just
we had,
continue when they finished 20 years ago,
yeah,
right? Mm.
totally. We didn't even talk about Magnetize. We just wanted to see each other again. And the same with Calvin. And then I played them Magnetize and everyone said, yeah, well, let's do it. But unfortunately, Calvin decided to leave the band soon after for his own personal reasons. So it became just me and Mike.
But you recorded it as a duo because on the cover,
Yeah.
just two and
Just the two
Mike.
of us. Yeah, we did the whole
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And it was in a way, it was kind of the sequel to Turn Back the Clock in the sense that I was writing it again and Mike was producing. Of course, they did do an album when I had left with a different singer with Phil Thornalley, but um, this felt like Johnny Hates Jazz again. And we still, those songs, some of those songs are big parts of our live set. Magnetized became quite well known over here.
Mhm.
And we wrote and recorded it in exactly the same way we did Turn Back the Clock. We spent ages over it. Um, and that was the catalyst for continuing.
Okay, how do you feel when you hear some of your songs in the radio or see the video and in TV right now after the almost 40 years?
I feel great. I feel very fortunate. And I look at the videos of when I was younger and I think I wish I had been this person back then. because I would have made wiser choices. And
Hmm.
but no, I feel very proud and very honored. And I mean, you know, we're putting out a new single in a three weeks, August 21st, a single called Soul Believer.
Woo, okay.
Yeah. And it's on a record label called Revolver Records, Warner
Mhm.
Brothers over there. And Jackie Graham, I don't know if Jackie is well known
Mm.
in your part of the world. Jackie is a well-known British soul singer,
Mhm.
and she was famous for doing a cover of "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love," originally by the Detroit Spinners. She did that with a guy called David Grant, and they had a
Mhm.
big hit. But she had some big hits here. So she's guest vocalist along singing it with me, and um, it feels like something's happening for Johnny Hates Jazz. It's one thing to kind of be an 80s band and you do the festivals and it's lovely, and you know your audience is the same audience you had when you were younger, that we're all just older now. But something is changing. We got a lot of young people to our gigs, and young people I think they want to know about the 80s. They connect with it somehow. It doesn't sound so distant. You know, 40 years ago, it's Andre, I'm 62 now. So if I think about myself, you know, when I was a teenager, I'd be thinking about music of the 40s, the 30s, and it sounded totally different. Fortunately, I loved that stuff. I loved that as well, but the 80s stuff doesn't sound totally different. It's not as distant. And let's face it, I think the songs of the 80s are, you know, I'm not just talking about me, of course. In general, they're just fantastic songs. You know, some of the great songwriters came out of that time. You can't, you know, we mentioned Duran Duran, Save a Prayer. What an amazing song. The Tears for Fears stuff, you know, um, there's so many you could mention. The Human League, Don't You Want Me? I mean, we did a gig with Mark Almond the other day, and
Mhm.
and he's got some great tracks, but every dime he does, Tainted Love. I mean, it's fantastic. It's unbelievable. So we get a lot of younger people, and I think this new single, Soul Believer, which is very much a love letter to the soul music we grew up listening to in the 70s. Because a lot of the bands in the 80s were actually soul, we called them soul boys. Spandau Ballet were,
Mhm.
you know, very much so. Duran Duran were. I ended up working with Nile Rodgers, you know, we all had that. So
Yeah.
me and Mike have made this song with Jackie, um, to really honor that soul music and do it in our way. We still sound like Johnny Hates Jazz,
Mhm.
but it just feels like there are doors opening. So it's a really, really exciting time.
So you're also working on a new album because your last one, by the way, was 2020. So you're
Yeah.
working right now on a
Well,
new album.
what we're thinking of is next year is 40 years since the release of Shattered Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So we're thinking about doing a compilation album
Mm-hmm.
with four new songs,
Okay, wow.
and the album will be called Shattered Dreams, the album, and we'll tour internationally to celebrate the 40 years, and then we'll do a new album. So we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of feeling that's the order. But you know, if Soul Believer suddenly, you know, becomes enormous, then we'll do a new album.
Okay, because it's almost the time, because Magnetize was 2/12/13. Yes, and Wide Awake 2020, so 7 years break. So okay.
You're
It
right.
looks like you likes the same, because next year it will be 7 years.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that, Andre. That's wild. That's a long time,
Nice
isn't it?
plan.
Yeah, okay.
Nice plan.
Okay.
The last one,
Yeah.
do you miss uh your popularity from the 80s?
Yeah, yes and no, because I'm older and slightly wiser, and in a way, I don't look, put it this way. how would I feel about being young again in the 80s? It was a great time. Would I want to be a young musician today? No, I wouldn't. It's it just everything's changed in a way that I feel is quite foreign. I don't, as a musician, I don't know. Do you know who Charlie Puth is, Andre? Do you play Charlie Puth on?
Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie Puth is really, really good, actually. He's not particularly young anymore, but
Mhm.
he's a current artist, and he was interviewed recently, and he was asked what does he think the best song of the 80s is, and he didn't pause. He said "Shattered Dreams" by Johnny Hates Jazz.
Mm.
And he then mentioned Johnny Hates Jazz in the next interview he did, where he explains it in more detail, Shattered Dreams, and the record comes on behind him, and it's a really lovely moment. And in a way, I think, maybe there would be people out there who would understand what we were doing. But in general, I think I feel for young musicians. I think it's gotten very difficult for them, I also think, if I may, I'll just take that in 1 second. The record industry, which I mentioned before, actually did a great job in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Yes, there were complications, but they did a great job of making sure they invested in people who they thought had natural ability. And now most young artists don't have that chance. The labels aren't interested.
Mm.
And so I can't, and they're competing with computer games and all these things I mentioned before. So, and they have to be on social media all the time, and everything's very visual, and there's no enigma anymore, no mystery anymore.
Mhm.
And so, no, I wouldn't want to be a young artist now and I don't think I would be appreciated. But back then, would I go back if I had the chance? Yeah, of course.